My name is Stephen Yarwood. I think I'm the only Australian at the entire conference, which is really cool, so g'day. I'm the former Lord Mayor of Adelaide, Australia. I'm a city planner. I'm also an urban futurist. My business is City 2050. So I like to think about the long-term transformative strategic planning. We have a lot of speakers in the next 45 to 50 minutes, so we will move very quickly. And it's my absolute pleasure to firstly introduce my friend and colleague, Hazem Galal, who can introduce himself and his topic. Please welcome Hazem.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here today again in Moscow at the Moscow Urban Forum. What I'd like to do in the next few minutes is to share with you some initial insights of a research that we're currently doing on what are the characteristics of the future city, what does it mean to be a future city, and what are some of the key success factors.
Sorry, English.
The way we've done this research, and hopefully my slides would come up shortly. If not, I'll just do it without slides. Yes, thank you. So the idea here is that we looked at 10 cities and we looked at different elements. We did a survey of citizens in this city. Do we have a clicker somewhere? Or I could just, next slide please. It's a joint research, as you can see, between PwC and Microsoft. So the idea, we looked at these 10 cities that you can see there, Moscow, Hong Kong, London, Dubai, Singapore, and all the others. And we started really to think about, oftentimes we have a lot of great strategies in cities. We started to look at what strategies do these cities have? Are these strategies aligned with the expectations and the priorities of the citizens in those cities? Are they addressing the same challenges that experts in urbanization are predicting that would happen in the future? And then most importantly, what are the key success factors to deliver on these strategies? And I'll share with you here some of the initial findings. This is still work in progress, but we wanted to share with you some of the patterns that are emerging. So the three focus areas, basically what has changed, what is the vision, and most importantly, how do we deliver on that vision? Next slide, please. What are some of the interesting findings so far? Interestingly, when you think about some of the indicators like, vehicle to population ratio, here really it's a tale of different cities, if you will. We're seeing vehicle ownership to population ratios in more developed cities actually either flat or on the decline. This is a function of the sharing economy, of some changes of the attitudes of the younger population that don't want to own vehicles. But on the other hand, in some of the developing economies where it's still a status symbol to own a vehicle, the ownership is still on the rise, mainly in places like China and other sort of like developing economies that are modernizing. Another interesting characteristic here is basically the increase of density. So the population density in the built-up areas on average is predicted to increase by 13%. And what that means, like in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, where we already have a lot of high density developments, technology and other ways of reorganizing the urban space will really play an important role so that we can increase that density without compromising the quality of life. Another expected outcome in the next few years from 2010 to 2030 is the increase of the demographic burden. As we have aging populations and as we have people living longer, the number of people that have to work in a city to support either the youngsters or the elderly, the burden will increase by approximately 13%. And again, other things like shopping online, other trends also like remote working will increase. These are the challenges, no surprises there. They very much align with a study we did with the World Economic Forum a few years ago on what are some of the major challenges that urban areas will face. Now, what is interesting is when you look to these challenges, not by the experts, but by the residents, some of the really important challenges like resource scarcity or natural disasters and climate change are not really top of mind for the citizens. They're more worried about basically the load of the infrastructure and how that impacts them on a day-to-day basis in their commute, in the services that they are getting. So the citizens' view is more focused on the things that would impact them in their day-to-day life compared to the experts' view that would probably look at all of these things holistically. Next slide, please. One example here in terms of how a typical city would start to develop its strategies and its holistic thinking over time. And we took London here as an example and reviewed all of its published strategies as a city. And you notice that the jargon changes over time, the focus is cumulative. So, I mean, nobody spoke about inclusive and smart cities many years ago. Now it's almost becoming common practice in most of the cities around the world. And this is just one example. So the tendency and the trend for all of these cities that they start taking a lot of the, yeah, sorry. No, it's all right. This is fine. No, this is fine. Stay on London. Yeah. So you see here basically how London has evolved over time in building up and, you know, cumulative focus, combining competitiveness, technological advancement, and so forth. Yeah, and this is pretty much consistent with what we've seen in the published strategies of all of these cities. What are some of the actual elements that we see reflect in these medium to long-term strategies? And you see here from all of these concepts, the city as a gateway in terms of long-term development, and you see that which cities have addressed which factors in their strategies as well. So not a single city has addressed everything 100%, but again, there's a lot of commonality, and depending on the challenges that a city is facing, you find the emphasis in its own strategies. But this is all great. How do we actually deliver on these visions and strategies? Another thing here is also in terms of the expectations. Look at Moscow here. This is interesting because in the two axes here, you have one axis is looking at the share of the population that is positively assessing changes in the quality of life, and then the expectations. So the message is basically that, you know, the Muscovites, they're kind of like looking at everything as important, you know, whereas in other cities, there is a tendency to focus on fewer areas that are priority for the population, and they think these are the areas that a city should be addressing. Whereas in Moscow here, you guys are very demanding. You think everything is important, and you want to make sure that the city is addressing everything, and you're lucky that, you know, from 7 or 8 years ago, you're having a mayor and a team that's actually starting to address your demanding needs. Again, another example is, you know, of improvements that happen in Moscow in the area of mobility. And you can tell here basically through some of the indicators in terms of the use of public transport, the commute time and so forth. And what you see here on the right-hand side is the intensity of the commute by day. And you see that there are peaks, maybe with the exception of Stockholm all the way to the right, where they have managed to spread the load of transport. I'm glossing quickly over some of these things, but this is, as I said, is work in progress. And what's next basically is we're gonna again, continue to develop the so what's. What does that mean in terms of some of the key success factors that these cities are delivering, you know, whether it's in terms of private sector collaboration, whether it's in terms of program management, whether it's in terms of, you know, strategic use of technology and so forth. So I'll stop here, you know, in the interest of time, and I'll make sure that in the discussion maybe I will highlight some more elements of the research and where we're taking it next. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A round of applause. Now we're very privileged to have Sergei Ereman, the mayor of Krasnoyarsk. Is that okay? Please. Yeah. My Russian is terrible. Please excuse me. Please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, giving me an opportunity to take part in this discussion. We are a town in Siberia. We are quite far from the public interest, but we are an actively growing city. We have faced some serious challenges and trends and changes in our urban space. Of course, we have some stable trends. For many years, we've been growing as a city of industry, science, and technology. But currently, we are changing to a new format. We are changing our worldview and the way we see our city globally. We are preparing for the global winter university games. For the first time, it's going to take place in our country, in our city. We are changing the mentality of our population, and we have been forming some conservative approaches. We were this rigid, conservative, remote city, and now we are trying to change our public opinion to finally open up, to show our nature and our specialties to the rest of the world. We're trying to change the mentality of our residents. I've been in charge of the city for a relatively short term, for 10 months, but I understand what our city needs, that we need to have this new development trend. Until recently, we need to remind ourselves where Krasnoyarsk is located. It has always been a remote city from the European part of Russia. It's a 4-hour flight from Moscow, even longer from other European cities. But I am convinced that considering globalization trends and reducing the transfer time, our city should become this bridge between different areas, and our minus will turn into our advantage. We will be equally distant or equally close to Europe and Asia, a meeting place so that one could save time arriving in our city, doing some business when you want to interact with your European or Asian partners, and also at the same time spend some quality leisure time enjoying Siberian landscapes and nature. We are building our strategy. This is our future. And the scarlet thread in what we do is this idea of union on the macro, regional, and micro-regional level. This is our scarlet thread that we are using as we develop our urban space. At the macro level, we have some serious infrastructure projects. If you come to our city, you can quickly get to some ski resorts, to some nature reserves that have UNESCO status, and that's all within the city limits. We have this, the Yenisei River, which has more water than any other river in Russia, and we are going to change how our city is going to become known globally. And on top of macroeconomic interactions and globalization, I also see my task to build and bring our population closer to global formats. We have more than 1 million people in our city, and we're growing. Every resident of the city should partake of the life of the city in all its elements, and every major city faces a similar problem today when you see this segregation by interests and so on, and we need to give our residents freedom to use and live in every part of the city. That should be our priority, and this is what gives us the right to see, look at the future with hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Paulina. Would you like to provide your presentation, please? Okay.
Большое спасибо.
My name is Polina Krychkova. I represent the Department of Economic Policy and Development of the City of Moscow. Let me refer to that statement that was, to that survey that was already presented here. The world is truly global. If we look at those 10 very different cities, we will see that the trends are quite similar. There are differences, there are nuances and details, but overall our globe is quite small, and what's important for metropolises is also important for Moscow. My other point, my second point, all major cities are becoming human-centered, human-oriented. Human beings are what matters in the city. Human beings should feel comfortable. Everyone has different understanding of comfort, and there may be other differences, but now it's a common place, and it's very important that residents of the city become the most important thing. I'm not going to give you all those details about human-centered policy here in Moscow. The mayor already explained it in detail yesterday. But again, I'm just saying Moscow is focusing on its residents and following the global trends, even though the understanding of comfort is different in different locations. Another point that I'd like to focus on, it's very important for the economic policy in the country and the overall development of the city to respond to those three questions that were asked in this survey. How do we make a city a comfortable location? How to ensure sustainable comfort, and where to get the money for all that? And Moscow shows us that we have some, of course, economic foundation which allows us to make some global changes, but the experience of other cities shows us that even if you don't have such significant financial resources as Moscow, you can make life comfortable and attractive for the residents and tourists. And the last thing I'd like to mention, if you assess Moscow in the context of global trends, the most important fact for us is that more than 60% of Moscow residents want to live in Moscow, not elsewhere. And it's important because it shows us the transformation that happened to our mentality in the last 10 to 15 years. 10 years ago, people had to live in Moscow because that's where they had their jobs and they're making their living. But they all said, if I had more money, I would move elsewhere with a better environment, better climate. Today, Moscow is gradually transforming into a city where people want to live, not just earn their living. And this is a city where they want to come, where they want to be, and it's going to grow for a considerable amount of time. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Jerry Hurtulin, who is the president and co-founder of Global Futures Group, a futurist like myself. I'm curious, Jerry, they say smart cities is going to cost upwards of $40 trillion. I hope you can tell us if it's worth doing.
Thank you. Well, there's an interesting story. In Japan in the 1600s, they banned guns for 2 centuries to protect the samurai. So, in essence, they did the same thing. Let's not be smart, let's just figure out how we get along. 200 years later, they moved into the 19th century and became one of the nations of the world. So I think you can try to step out of being a smart city and you'll be left behind. So we'll have a big experiment. Those cities which want us not be smart, step up and do it and see how life goes over the next 50 years. Those that are smart, I predict, will be far better. So I want to talk just a little bit about what I think really matters for smart cities and cities in the future. This, I think, is the key. Talent is the oil of the 21st century. Every reason we want to make a city someplace we can live and like to live is because we want to attract talent and keep talent to be in that city. And so I think the essence of what we have to face is how do we get talent to want to live in our cities? My view is it takes two things. One is committed leaders. You've seen the mayor of Moscow talking about his ambitions and the changes that have happened in Moscow in the last 10 years. That requires leadership. But it also, of course, requires some picture of where you're taking the city. And I think these are the key issues. And it's not just an agenda, it's an ecosystem. So to go back, it's got to be creative, you got to feel like you can make things happen, and yet it's got to be competitive. You've got to have ideas that are the best percolate to the top. We've done that in New York City. We've actually brought a whole new university to New York by competing the chance to get a large island as their own. So you use assets to turn them into something more, just as this park is done here. Second, it needs to be concentrated and yet convenient. We've talked about getting around, lack of congestion. But you do need to get people into the center of the city where they like to live. And third, you have to have capital. There has to be money. And money needs to be what I call curious money, like venture capital, like angel funds, that are willing to take a chance on the future. Old capital that cares only about what happened in the past is not very helpful. So you need to find money that's curious and willing to be part of your city. Those three things, for me, add up to the kind of ecosystem that will truly change a city. And I predict we'll see smart cities around the world, megacities and more, deciding to pursue ideas like this so they can do one key thing, attract talent that wants to build their future together. Thanks.
That was great. Thank you very much. Our next presenter, I didn't expect you to be so quick. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Hilla Oren, the CEO of Tel Aviv Foundation. Hilla, please.
Jerry, could you put my slides on? They are also not ready yet, and the flicker, but I couldn't take my talk about Tel Aviv and refer to what Jerry just said, because in a way, he is always before everything, also before my presentations. You should have summarized what I want to say, because Tel Aviv is a tier 2, in a way, city off to New York, and when we need to think of ourselves, how are we getting global? This is a question. How is Tel Aviv in the competition with the world? We thought we should refer to ourselves as a smart startup city. And why is that? When you ask, how are you part of the 20 leading cities, New York, Tokyo, London? Tel Aviv is not there yet, right? But if we'll define our USP, if we'll know what is the unique selling point, our DNA, which in Tel Aviv actually 100 years ago, this is the way the city, how many people here have been to Tel Aviv? Okay, so this is like 10%. So I'll take the 90 other percent to a little tour for 1 minute, through the city, which will show you that in that place 100 years ago, where it was Sands and startuppers, we call them the founders of the city, today is Rothschild Boulevard, where 1,500 startups are in that region, more than any other startups per capita except for San Francisco. So understanding that is okay, but it's not the whole story. We have Jaffa with one of the most ancient port in the world city. We have the White City with the Bauhaus concentration. We're wild and free. This is how we like to refer to ourselves, 1/3 residents between that age. This is the way the New York Times refer to us. We have a beautiful beach. But at the end of the day, this is the gateway to Israel. I want to... Why doesn't it move? Talking about talent and talking about what Richard Florida will talk in 4 in the afternoon, the creative class, getting them talent, okay, Jerry, talent, talent, talent. This is the way the entrance to the city hall looks in Tel Aviv. Technology, free Wi-Fi, tolerance, of course. But we need for all of this, as you said, I'm going to use it now, curious money. Financial tools. I refer to myself as a city maker. Whoever is around here has different jobs. You're the CEO, you're the finance man, you're the education, but we're city makers. We need to take off red tapes. We need to make collaborations between all the departments, otherwise we will not be the business center of our cities. We will not be able to attract all these startups from all over. This is what we did in order to get Tel Aviv to be a startup city, but I think at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your city is a place where your residents really feel you crack the innovation code. How do you do that? You listen to them, but you don't tell them you listen to them. You really listen. And this is hard because we're not patient and we have our jobs and we have our programs and we have our, job description. But I think they know better than us, just like the woman before referred to the human resources of the cities. If we want the smart city to be the new city of the world in 2030, 2050, we need to make sure that we know the needs, we take off red tapes, and we find smart money, or how you refer to that, in new financial tools. New financial tools are crowdfunding, city coin, city card, social finance, public-private partnerships in joint ventures with business, but again, in new ways, in curious. Traditional philanthropy is great, but putting on top of that some layers, only when you have all the will of the city and its stakeholders, and of course a little, a little organization, like I'm the CEO of the Tel Aviv Foundation. We are 40 years old. We have our tradition, we have our legacy, but we understand that we will not be curious and agile to the future. It will not work. And I'll tell you something. In the last 2 years, we doubled the money from Israel itself, not only from abroad. That means we've got money inside our cities, but we need to find city game changers, really projects that are adding value. And with that mission, through education, welfare, innovation, etc., we can find some game changer projects that all our stakeholders and our city will want to join. This is just the first velodrome for bicycle being built just now. It's going to be finished in a month. The first one in the Mediterranean. We brought the Giro from Italy. All new ways to collaborate. It's not always only about technology, because technology is a tool. But if you want to make the city grow and you want all your citizens to be with you, you have to make sure that the homeless have a place, and the innovation has a place, and the sports have a place, and the adding value with our social outcomes, I think, in a nutshell, will be the word that will cutting-edge urban philanthropy through the matching of the municipality and new financial tools. 2 words to wrap up. 2 beautiful foundations I met in the last 2 years, and you guys in different cities around the world can join. Bernard Varlier Foundation, where it looks at the way cities are built from urban 95 centimeters, how the city is planned through a vision of 95 centimeters. Very interesting. Usually these people, these young kids don't have anybody that talks from them, but they're going to be the citizens of the smart city of 2030. So we're now looking at Tel Aviv at how it will be through a 95 centimeters. And on the other side, you're probably all aware of the resilient cities. How will our cities be at the end of the day also resilient? Because it's not only about today, but it's also about tomorrow, about the atmosphere, the culture, etc. I'd love to host you in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much.
That was wonderful. Our next presenter is Eduardo Lopez Moreno, who is the Director of Research and Capacity Development at the UN Habitat. Eduardo, cities are growing up and they're growing out. How do we make them livable to fulfill the dreams of future citizens?
Thank you. Let me start by telling you that the UN Habitat, we have a study with New York University, Lincoln Institute, 200 cities across the world that represent globally the world at 95%. And I would like to refer to densities as it is being asked. Densities is a very simple and a very elusive concept. Simple because you just take the urban area of the city, you divide by the population, and apparently you get densities. The reality is much more complex than that. It was mentioned in the first presentation that densities are growing. Well, this is a civilized discussion. Our data is telling us exactly the contrary. Densities in the world, in the urban expansion areas of cities, have reduced by 30%, including megacities, including Moscow. And the reason of this is twofold. The first one, if you take all the cities of the world, from the north to the south, to the east to the west, they grew on average 3 times more of population growth. They expanded in the peripheries 3 times more. And when they expanded 3 times more, densities, that means that population living there, did not multiply 3 times. They multiply only 1 time on average. So you have a concomitant phenomenon of density reduction with the expansion of cities. And third one, very interesting, is that the public space, streets, areas in the urban expansion of cities are also reducing. Now, to respond to your question is, if you see that urban expansion is reducing densities, what is happening there? It's bringing a very unsustainable model of urbanization for 5 main reasons. Number one, as the cities grow and expand, sometimes to peripheries, you will see almost automatic coming some forms of spatial inequalities that take the form of gated communities, slum areas, or poverty related. Second is, since the cities unnecessarily grew physically, you need to have much more need of cost of infrastructure to bring to the peri-urban areas. Number 3, you have more energy cost. Energy cost, CO2 emissions, and 5, something like 30% of this growth at the world average took place in areas that were environmentally protected. So density reduction, I said it can be an elusive concept because I'm sure you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 11 on cities. UN Habitat, myself in my department, we are responsible of measuring the change on the indicators associated with Goal 11. And one of those indicators is something that is called urban sprawl or land efficient use. And obviously with this growth of cities, sprawl is taking the place. Efficiency is not necessarily there in terms of. And the question that we were asking is, when you can consider that densities are good? I mean, it's an indicator that would necessarily tell you at which level you have good or bad densities. And the response is, there is no metric, but there is an optimal value. And this optimal value goes from something like 70 inhabitants per hectare to 120, 70 to 120. Today, the world is at 90. But for instance, Moscow is at 50 inhabitants per hectare. And what happened when you reduce less than 70? And you will see the connection to the notion of smart cities and to the notion of the future of cities is that the provision of public goods, transport, services, physical infrastructure will be automatically to be subsidized because you don't have the critical mass of people living in the place where these services or these public goods are to be provided. Then, what is the future of cities with densities? It's unlike, and I think we have the right to dissent with this data. Our data is based on satellite images on 3 different years, 1990, 2000, 2015. We produce a book that is called The Atlas of Urban Expansion, a very famous book on this. And what we need to understand is that the notion of smartness of cities will need to come with smart governments as well. Not only technology, because and not only talent, because if the cities are growing in the way they are growing, is that the talent is being used for other purposes. And the governance of the cities will demand in the future that we need to pay attention to what is happening in these cities in terms of this unsustainable mode of expansion and growth. Last point to conclude, how densities should look in the future, we call it, and this is a work we did with the World Bank, sustainable densities. And sustainable densities is the combination of 3 forms of densities. One is residential densities, as I said, at least 90 inhabitants per hectare, 130, 140. Second, infrastructure density, which means that in the places where the people live, infrastructure should be there. The reality, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning, is that public space and streets reduced by 30% in the expansion of cities. So you have less densities, less public areas, less streets, so you are not having this benefit of sustainable densities. And the third one, and fundamental one, is economic densities in the form of economies of agglomeration. It's these 3 together that will generate prosperity and sustainability and will connect to this notion of smart cities, in my view.
Thank you. Please. Some very valuable information there. That was brilliant. Our next presenter is Simonetta Sensi, who is the Deputy Mayor of Genoa for Urban Development. Please join us in welcoming her.
Okay, here you are. Okay, thank you. Thank you for. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to have the slide, please. Is it possible? Okay. We are invited, and we say thank you to all the people that invite us because our city is not so big city like you before speaking, and the new municipality arrived in something like 1 year ago, and is a different modality of working in the city because, for example, I'm in a technical choice and not a political election, and this is a good way for working because I'm an architect, and so I suppose that this could be a good way for work, not for because chose me, but because I suppose that the chance is more. As I am a counselor for urban planning in Genoa, and we are organized the next 7 years of work, very intensive, to transform our city in a new town where we want to like citizens want to continue to live, and the new generation would like to transfer to live, like in the future, like we have just seen in Tel Aviv, because the work that they do in Tel Aviv is very, very good for our modality. For this reason, we have programming a new generation for a transformation for the city, for Genoa, and for the new vision, starting from its history, its potential, and thinking about one future dream. We wanted to explain that Genoa has been very, as inside a very big determination to have the chance to change the city and anticipate innovation, investment, and moving forward. Genoa has an intense cultural activity and high quality of life, and this is a city of culture, culture, industry, and one of the European better preserved medieval historical center. It's a city of art, culture, and we suppose that during the we know that during the Industrial Revolution, Genoa recovered itself thanks to important economy and logistic and industrial solution. Important roles are now beginning to be played to be a new economy together with the tourism and the leisure activities. Genoa is gradually becoming more involved in the tourist market with art, music, gastronomy, architecture, and history, renovated old port, beautiful site. Like we have a very important aquarium in Genoa. And the port is the most important Italian seaport, and it is in competition with the big port like Marsiglia, Barcelona, and we would like that it could be one of the most important port in the Mediterranean Sea. And so we wanted to grow our city. We wanted our city grew up and began a little mega city, not mega city like Moscow with like Tel Aviv, but something like similar. And also Genoa is a point of departure and the arrival of the cruise and the tourism. And we have this year, only this year, we have the pleasure of increase of 5% our tourism in the city. The historical center is one of the most important in the world, and we have renovated and reput it in use, but only beginning with the cleaning of the city. We suppose that this one could be one of the first thing to do. Another good important part of Genoa is the center of research of the technology in a part of the city named Erzelli, and which is the largest Italian science, research, and technology park. Every year in Genoa is there also the boat show, the Aeroflora, and all the important fair. For us, for concluding, the innovation in Genova means revitalization of industry and the port, the logistics, the tourism, and we have to concentrate our work in hospitality to transform it in industry and cultural hub. Now, for the change of our city, we open a new laboratory that named Urban Lab that work on the potentiality transformation of our territory. And we work in close collaboration with the System Port Authority of Genova to create a new plans for the city. We have recently been able to define a first strategic area for urban renewal, and we wanted to present two big operations for start with our new work. That is the rehabilitation of the eastern waterfront and the rehabilitation of the new silos, or the old silos of Genoa. Thanks to the architect Renzo Piano that donated to the municipality a project for, not a project really, but a vision for the project of the seawater front of Genova. Now we have we wanted to create a new part of city that is a new quarter for the fair city, and we want to transform the promenade in seafront for a cycle path, extension of one promenade that just exists, and the urban park for the city. And this is composed, this part of quarter is composed from 4 buildings that will be rehabilitated. And we have decided to sell this area with the master plan of Renzo Piano, and we are making a call for project for investors, because the investors could be coming in our city, and is a new modality for us, is the new modality of business. And we suppose that the revitalization project of this trade quarter could create a new part of business, a new part of city for create a new modality of relationship between the city and the sea. Is there a good functional mix for use the quarter and to transform the city in a new city in relationship with the sea? Is there a vision for all the city that is a city very long, because 13 kilometers of longer, and the seafront project have to regeneration. We hope that we create a regeneration effect, restoring the city across the territory, using the territory for restoring the city. This is our aim. This is our goal for our future. And the other big building that needs to be restoring is the Anabik Silos, that is a old building in the city that was forget in our city, and this is we wanted to, in accordance with the historical and environmental value, we want to transform in a new part of city with the internal part that will be for the culture, for the citizen, and for all the city. And so I would like to invite you in our city to visit it, and also for have other possibility to have discussion with someone that is more longer than us are working on the city. And I suppose that we have a lot of things to learn, but our city have the potentiality to transform and to begin one of the most important cities in the Mediterranean Sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Simonetta. We are travelling the world. Our final presenter is Mr. George Ferguson, who was the former mayor of Bristol from 2012 to 2016 and is an expert on people and cities. George, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and I'm aware I'm between you and your lunch. The worst thing that can happen to a master plan is that it gets built. I have been involved with many master plans, but I never mean them to be built. What is important, and what I've heard here today, and it's been really encouraging, is that we look at what people want and what makes a good neighborhood in the city. Planning to me is, yes, it's about smart cities, but it's about people-oriented smart systems. Smart cities are often misused. It's often a misused term. It all becomes about the technology. It must not be about the technology. The technology is what helps us get to where we want to be. Where do we want to be? We want to be living in happy, environmentally friendly, sustainable, resilient cities. I think there is an attitude that helps with all these discussions. And by the way, yes, I was the mayor of Bristol. I'm also an architect. But I try not to think too much like an architect. Architects tend to think about the building. We should think much more about the social space. And Bristol is a city very similar to Genoa. It's a port, it's a similar size, it's a historic city. It's a historic city from which a Genoan sailed across the sea in 1497 to discover Newfoundland. We have a very similar makeup. But we are small cities. I've been advising Chinese cities, and it can be depressing because you see this giant master plan. The answer, and we all have one answer, but beware of single answers. The answer to me is to create neighborhoods of different types, because cities should be polycentric, not only geographically, but they should have many different characters and purposes within them. 10-minute neighborhoods. Neighborhoods with which you can walk, within which you can walk to find everything you need for life. Neighborhoods in which you do not need a car. And I've heard more and more during these 2 days the need for us to suppress the car in the city. So think about 10-minute neighborhoods. 5 or 10 minutes to the metro station so that you can have the joy of the wider city. 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get to a very safe cycle track, preferably 1 minute to get to a safe cycle track from which you can enjoy the whole city. 10 minutes to a major park, but also think about the little parks, the tiny pocket parks, the bees on the roofs of our buildings. So to me, the master plan for a city is not a physical thing, it is an attitude. It is understanding what gives joy to life, what makes happy citizens, easily said, but also what makes entrepreneurial citizens that will make things happen in their neighborhood because they have pride in their neighborhood, and they will build theaters, they will make cafes, they will make bread, they will make beer, they will make vodka, and they will have fun in the place that they live. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Now, 2 more things. Please join me at 5 p.m. this evening when I speak about the 3-dimensional city. I will be speaking about the 4th and 5th dimension of cities and the role of smart citizens instead of smart cities. So please join me at 5 o'clock. Also, very quickly, I want to play a game. Everyone, stand up. Stand up. Everyone, stand up. Okay. Sit down if you have used your car in your city in the last week. Sit down. Sit down if you have not walked 10,000 steps in one day in your city in the last week. Sit down if you do not own a bicycle. Sit down if you have not used public transport in your city in the last week. Sit down if your bicycle tyres are flat. Right. Please join with me in thanking our model citizens and our speakers, and be the change you want to see in your city. Thank you very much.